why we don't have solutions for our patients and for the people. But also being a researcher, we know and we often that whatever solutions have to go into practice and policy, unless they are deeply immersed in good science and are hypothesis driven, will not last. And this is something I picked up from a well-known journal, that what would be the facets of excellence in the way we do science. So of course we would look at significant discovery, we would look at transformative, impactful innovations, but I guess the bottom line would be at least research to policy would be a very important component. And I can play the devil's advocate and say that despite India being 5th in the globally in the rank of publications, we still don't have impactful innovations. That eludes us. We have some, but we're not really the leaders. And again, looking at this, exploring it further, the question is, are we asking the right research questions? Are we unearthing solutions to complex human problems, problems which have significance in life and public health? Should we think more about the translational value of our work? And are we really working in isolation? Should the strategy then be discovery, which is inspired by a societal need and innovation, for creating applications that can then go back to society, and in the morning she had said engaging with the society. So this maybe would be an important strategy. And it's again looking at this, what is important is that the environment in which we ask our research questions, it influences our behavior and productivity. So fortunately for me and for some of my colleagues, and we had this environment when we were at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences. We had an infrastructure in its own way across silos, which was multidisciplinary, and we were able to answer some important questions and be able to take some of our research into policy. And one of the programs that we led was the successful implementation of the oral rehydration solution, which is currently in the market and being used in the national and the global policy. And this again came from scientific work where intestinal perfusion studies and in experimental models and adult human volunteers showed that there was to be a change in the osmolarity of the oral rehydration solution, which would help in reducing the diarrhea severity and duration. This was followed, we did large double-blind placebo-controlled studies in several thousands of children. We, as well as these was replicated, finally to come out after 10 years of work with the current reduced osmolarity oral. Further, to refine the treatment of diarrhea, we looked at zinc because experimental evidence, again, it was immersed in science, some experimental evidence which had shown that zinc influences host immune responses and epithelial repair. And we did cohort studies to be able to generate the hypothesis to test an intervention, and we found that zinc deficiency is associated with increased diarrhea and pneumonia in our children in the community, and there are several reasons for why we are zinc deficient. I'm not going to go into details. So therefore, the only way of answering this was to do large randomized controlled studies, specifically rather than supplementing everybody with zinc, which again would be a problem in our country where iron supplementation programs have not worked. We looked at treatment of zinc in diarrhea and found it to reduce diarrhea severity and duration. We were able to introduce it in the national and global policy. Again, over 7 to 8 years of work which led to that. We were also partly responsible for transferring the technology for dispersible tablets to the Indian industry. Taking the zinc story further, which is still continuing, if it works in diarrhea, does it work in sepsis? Our initial evidence over 700 infants with neonatal sepsis, we found that it reduces treatment failure rate. Despite publishing it well, the government was not ready to accept it as a policy because we needed to replicate it with a harder outcome. And therefore, we are now doing a large study across 2 countries, India and Nepal, in 4,000 infants to look at whether zinc can reduce deaths in sepsis when supplemented with antibiotics. And along with that, we are trying to study whether how zinc works in sepsis, particularly in those who have diarrhea in addition to sepsis. So another story was the India Rotovac story. I think most of you know that. I was not part of the larger group, but was part of the group which, when the strain was identified in the neonatal nursery at All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and today we all know, there was a partnering with the industry, with Bharat Biotech. Today this was the first vaccine which has been developed in India and brought to the Indian market. And then we had a small example of creating a diagnostic test for our children with celiac disease, because we had a cohort well-designed with well-defined serum, and we were able to partner with ICTP and get this test. So the question, what did we learn from all this? Before that, there was a question, how do you engage with the policymakers? So for each of this, we engaged with the policymakers, we engaged with the government, and they were receptive because there was evidence. We were able to show that it works, it can be replicated, and there is considerable significant reduction in morbidity with the interventions. And therefore, introducing it into policy and clinical practice was easy. So what did we learn? We saw to see the bigger picture, you focus and walk till the end of the story till you have a solution to that problem. Don't depend on government funding alone. We got some funding from the government, but for most of this work, we had funding from international sponsors, which was like WHO and UNICEF. But above all, we learned team science. And that is where I come to what the present is, and we've had considerable discussion in the morning breakout session, is that we have to accept the challenges of connectivity. If we want to do research which is applicable and engages with society, then we have to understand that there are challenges of connectivity, not only in terms of multidisciplines, as I've talked about, but also multifaceted infrastructure. And above all, have an innovative access to patients and population, and that's very crucial. So when I moved from AIMS to THSTI 7.5 years back, I was very nervous, but fortunately, I met people like Satyajit, Vinita, Dinkar, Molly, Partha, and some others who are not here, who also had a similar thought process and were ready to facilitate this philosophy and thinking further. So, Satyajit is going to talk a little about the concept of what we have at THST at the Pediatric Biology Centers, but I'm just going to very quickly run you through a program that we feel has been transformative, and we've learned a lot as we moved on. And being pediatricians, most of us, for us the burning question is maternal and child health, which is the key determinant of society. So despite all economic growth, we still have very dismal morbidity rates for both neonatal and infant mortality. And the killers are preterm birth, low birth weight, small per gestational, neonatal infection. So we decided to concentrate on preterm birth, and we got we were sponsored by the Department of Biotechnology for this large program, a multi-institutionally interdisciplinary program on preterm birth, which is coordinated by THSTI, but we have equal partners in the Regional Center for Biotechnology, when Dinkar was there, and continuing now with Tushar and with NIBMG. And it's unique because research institutes reached out to the district hospital, Gurgaon in Haryana. We have no access to patients or to a population. So we reached out to Gurgaon, created an infrastructure where we could work with them, and also to the other tertiary hospitals where the patients get referred. And it's truly interdisciplinary because we have clinical, epi, statistical, genetic, proteomic and imaging sciences as part of this whole program. The key objectives, I won't go into details, but the main thing is to do an appropriate risk stratification of mothers early in pregnancy so that we can, using modifiable factors which are proteins, genes, microbiome, and clinical and epi factors, do a characterization of the phenotype of preterm birth, which again is not clear so far. There is huge gaps in the fundamental knowledge of preterm birth, and that's why we don't have effective solutions. So you need answers to those gaps and eventually aid in development of interventions. So we enroll women early in pregnancy, follow them to 6 months postpartum. Epidemiological biospecimens and sonography is done at regular intervals. And currently we have enrolled 4,100 women. We've had 3,000 outcomes, and we will enroll another 4,000 to 6,000 pregnant women. Where we are going to get the funding from is where we are going to see if we can get funding from other sources as well as the government. And we've enhanced the application. So in answering some of the important original questions, we've also enhanced the application potential of this by setting up a repository, a platform for ongoing and future research, which is like we've got a well-characterized electronic clinical record repository, an imaging bank of over 150,000 images of women across pregnancy. This is something which has not been done globally because most of them are cross-sectional studies, and here we have longitudinal data. Along with that, we have a biospecimen repository of over 5 lakh samples of maternal sera, saliva, feces, high vaginal swabs, the placenta 1500, and eventually we'll have a mixed data bank. So lastly, while we have some original questions that we began with, we also, through small science meetings, through our discussions, we have generated funds using this as a platform, where we've been able to partner with, again across disciplines, and created another big program for effects of environment on pregnancy and how it affects the placenta and fetal growth. Use the ultrasound images and machine learning tools to develop prognostic and diagnostic tools for picking up preterm birth. We're very excited about the program on placenta and organ, which I've seen as a resident being thrown into the dustbin, where now and it's actually the cornerstone of pregnancy. And a huge program has been started based on some of the work we did, and also some, we hope that DBT was able to give that call after seeing some excitement in that program. And of course, looking at novel biomarkers of stress, looking at unexplored micronutrients, looking at markers for anemia and gestational diabetes. So it's a long list. These programs have come up on this platform that was created. So just as a summary, can't go into details because of constraints of time, but the philosophy is that if you want something changed, then you have to affect it to be able to change it. So you have to make yourself heard. And what I've learned and we've learned as a group, that it's the power of collective collaboration that works. And we have to build bridges and not burn them. So that's the success, and that's how we move forward. Satyajit.
I just discovered that Shinjini wants me to talk about the Pediatric Biology Center program. But I don't think I want to talk about it. The reason I don't want to talk about it is that she's presented to you what all of them as colleagues at the Pediatric Biology Center of the HSTI have put together as the future direction and the next iteration of that original program. So going over the original program I don't think is worthwhile. And what I'm instead going to do is make an argument to this audience. The traditional problem that anybody who works with any disease-related biological research, there are people in the audience who have made exactly that complaint to me in exactly that tone of voice. Sample भी नहीं मिलते. And if your idea of working in field human biology is to get samples from somebody, you're trying to do the wrong thing. The lesson I learned through the last 10 years of this engagement that you is a lesson that we had implicitly learned. Anna, George Mintabal, myself at NII, two of us three were clinically qualified. In fact, unlike Shinjini, we don't even have PhDs. But we hadn't done any human work whatsoever because we thought that trying to get samples and building that as the connection between the biology that we do at the bench and the clinic is really not going to be sustainable. The last 10 years have taught us that if anything, we were even more right than we thought we were. Because even with the connection of one of the few groups of clinical academics, this is a very rare breed in the country, and you have to look for them. You have to listen to all their woes about how they are losing people and how hospitals are treating them badly and so on and so forth, and sympathize, as I just did with Shinjini. And the fact of the matter is that even with that, the kind of problems that we come to evolve slowly as truly interesting scientific problems. You have to put together long-term collaborations. You have to put together collaborations not simply with outstanding clinicians. There are very large numbers of outstanding clinicians in the country who do great clinical care. But they are not all clinical academics. You need somebody who is willing to look systematically at data with interest about what's not known. Typically, the service providing outstanding clinicians are not terribly interested in this, which is how what I keep calling the sampleology model begins to function. But I'm thinking about all this as I'm listening to Shinjini talk, and then I'm thinking, we just had a conversation about what we should do in terms of the breakout themes, for example, about recruitment and related policies for young investigators. And around the table, there was this conversation about how ye hona chahiye, wo hona chahiye, government ought to do this, universities ought to do that, institutions ought to do something else. And all of that sounds to me as though we are doing, beer garden conversations. conversation. I was going to say coffee tables, but a little more beer. And it's not going to happen. You know, I know, we know it's not going to happen. So we are really just, oh no. What are we going to do? So one of the arguments that we were having in the breakout session was, shouldn't we, as the young investigators of the YIMS, a very large proportion of whom are present in the room here, shouldn't they begin to get together and empower themselves in a variety of ways? In ways that will eventually allow Ron to say, I know, I started it all, but now they've just taken off on their own. And I'm going to connect that with what Shinjini said to you. When we talk about the many difficulties of doing biological science in the country, in India, one of the things that constantly comes up from somebody or the other around the table is, there is no critical mass. We are all alone. And this is true. I'm not at all denying the validity of the point and the problem. But how are we going to deal with this? And how are we going to deal with this without the solution necessitating that DBT or DST or heaven forbid ICMR or Rakesh is somewhere around CSIR should do something different from what they have done so far? Are you serious? You think this is going to happen? Under those circumstances, here is a group of people, young, high benchmarked, enthusiastic, and cutting across very many silos of life sciences. In fact, it bothers me a little bit that as I'm listening to Shinjini, I'm thinking to myself, you know, the only people who are not represented in the room, as far as I know, and please correct me by raising your hand, somebody if I'm wrong, are clinical scientists. Thank you. I know your opinion. Epidemiologists. There are ecologists in the audience. No, I know. There are ecologists in the audience much more than there are epidemiologists. And yet, epidemiology is just human ecology. And my problem is, this is a group that encompasses what Jim calls biological scales of organization, from molecular structure to interactions to cells to physiological intra-organismal systems to ecosystems. Why on earth would you as a group not pull together from amongst yourselves ambitious cross scales of organization research programs? And I do not mean projects, I mean programs, long-term collaborative commitments amongst yourselves. Because, you know, if you can't even trust each other, who the hell can you trust? Under those circumstances, why are we dealing with themes that are to do with what other people can do for you? And why are we not dealing with a theme about what you can do for yourselves? Where is our ambitious program? This connects to something that I have said in multiple wireframes. And that is, if you are going to do something in the admittedly suboptimal resource and structure situation of India in biological sciences, you need to look for what advantages and strengths you have. And it seems to me that the ecological uniqueness uniqueness and diversity of the subcontinent, and I include, as I said, human ecology into it very much, namely epidemiology, the ecological diversity and uniqueness of the subcontinent is a major, this kind of starting point. And for us not to use that, for us not to build ambitious programs around that, for us to insist that we are going to, so I will quote young friends talking to me about, in response to this point. You know, I have to establish my own credibility first, then I will think about it. And my problem is, we tend to make a little rut for ourselves and then we tend to walk it. For pity's sake, do something ambitious from day one. Because if we are doomed to, listen to Ron as the boy dear, which actually he is, I think, but to Ron and Ron alone as the boy dear of what an outstanding, insightful, and socially engaged biologist should be. Why are we only looking ahead? I am. And the answer to Jeet's point of looking at me is in what I said a little while back. You do enough of this, oh, I need to establish my own credibility, otherwise nobody will take me seriously. Oh, I need to get my own papers out before I begin to collaborate. Oh, the field biology, regardless of whether you think about it as field biology in the sense of ecological data or field biology in the sense of community epidemiology. All of these are very hard and demanding. और पता है सत्यजीत, कोई बात उसमें से बहुत पूरे के कुछ नहीं निकलता. I mean, dig in, and then finally you don't get anything, and then funding agencies want to know what happened with all the money, and so on and so forth. I've done all of that, which is why Jitu ought to be looking at me. I've said all of this to myself, which is why I'm not wrong. I am arguing that if anywhere in the country there is such a group of people who come together not by funding, not by a single biological discipline, but by a common history of passionate interest in what you do, it's you. If you don't do this, किसका मुंह देखे? So please, can we seriously talk about the possibilities of large-scale ambitious research programs that integrate across biological scales of organization? That say, here's 12 of us who are going to work together for the next 15 years, and that simply because they begin in the field with all the uniqueness of the subcontinent are almost guaranteed to provide qualitatively, uniquely different insights. This is, as I said at the beginning, not easy or straightforward. And I don't think that that's been a great success. It's not been a great success so far because I think we overestimated how quickly we can go from empirical data collection, descriptive data collection, beginning to ask truly interesting cause and effect questions in biological systems. But as Shinjini showed, the kind of large scale we're talking about in the 10,000 scale collection of individuals as volunteers when you commit yourself to that kind of program, the possibilities of doing something remarkably and cumulatively interesting over the long term increase enormously. If at all there is a lesson that I thought I learned way too late and very poorly, but learned nonetheless, is that from the Pediatric Biology Center experimental example. So for me, repeated, that's the issue at stake. Are you going to do the safe and the incremental and think about your individual careers, or are you going to do something maybe a little bit riskier and more interesting than that? Thank you.
So what good are epidemiologists to the rest of you? Right? That's the question that you're asking. And it astonishes me that it's a question that even needs to be asked. Because it's where human variability is measured. It's where all quantitative traits will get analyzed. It's where causality for measurable parameters will get established. That's where it all begins. How can we not do this? That's exactly what we started with as underweight babies versus normal weight babies, and how many differences we can find between underweight and normal weight babies. I think this was actually a very trivial question in immunoepidemiology, if you will. But the point I'm trying to make is that somebody as an epidemiologist needs to ask how she fits into a collection of biologists, says something about our poverty of across scales of organization imagination. And that's what I'm trying to argue. So, thank you.
Centers. How do you biorecords? So you have the collection, but you have initiated with a grant money, but it's difficult for the we are also trying for LSDs for long term, but we could able to tag the NGOs, but NGOs can bring the patients to us, but again we require a large scale amplification, both grant side and the institutional ethical side and the doctor's point of view. So how do you approach in this angles?
So currently the biorepository is from the pregnancy cohort, and we have well-defined questions which so it was when we started it was with the idea of answering those questions that were very relevant for problem that we are addressing. We do realize that if we are looking at in a nested case control design, looking at some factors of preterm birth versus term, we are going to have many more term birth samples than we have of preterm birth. At the moment we have only 400, so it's a rate of 15%, and so we have many more term birth samples. So that's when the whole idea of a biorepository came around, and that's when we started looking for funds outside our parent funding agency, which was DBT, and so we got money from Gates Foundation. We are now trying to put in a big round to welcome, because this is huge, this is very important data. You've got very well characterized phenotypes. We have all the epidemiological data on these women. We have their diet, we have their social demographic along with all these blood samples. So now we're going to have this challenge of how do we sustain it. So what we are doing is that we will, whoever comes with a hypothesis-driven question within the group will have to build in money for the biorepository and the cohort as a contribution to the cohort and the biorepository.
So a more general answer to that question, how is any of this sustainable over the long term? Not just a biorepository. The general program is because these are programs where you will have intellectually autonomous principal investigators contributing together, but you will also have a very large set of team people, technologists, required for a whole range of stuff, whether it is nanofabrication or it is fieldwork epidemiology or northeast ecosystem analysis or whatever. How does one sustain all of this? I completely agree that it's a question and a problem. My answer to that is that the longer you can maintain it opportunistically, the more highly credible the program becomes, to the point that eventually it becomes too visible for governments to allow to fail. That's being cynical. But it's also the only realistic way that we are going to achieve this. So you will not have a single point of asymptote where you will say, this has become stable. Slowly over a decade, 15 years or so, it will become more and more and more stable. And I grant you that that is part and parcel of the many problems about this. So it's not at all my pretense that this is easy, why are we not doing it? It is my question. It's difficult, it's hard, it asks us to set ourselves aside or at least work together, but it's worthwhile, why are we not?
So just to add to what Satyajit is saying, we had funding agencies that were not interested in our initial applications.
At all?
At all. And these are international organizations. And now we have been approached to join the global, they are setting up a global omics study from this biorepository, and India has been asked to participate as one of the partners. Similarly, for the ultrasound images, we've been approached by the Oxford group to be part of a large machine learning exercise from imaging, image processing. So, you know, it's just, you have to make yourself heard, as I said.
Do you have a policy for distribution of the samples? Do you have a policy for distribution of the samples? Policy for distribution of the samples?
It's been set up by Department of Biotechnology, and all proposals which require use of samples have to go through a program management committee and then through a peer review process which the steering committee coordinates, and only then are the samples. So at the moment we've not opened it to anybody outside, because
But there are a range of both national and international learning experiences for handling these kinds of problems. There's a question back there? No.
In the breakout session, we had one subtopic about peer review. And today morning, I also talked with Professor Ron about publication of data which we generate working in different part of the country. So here, one thing I suggest that India Biosciences, or since this is the 10th anniversary, why can't we launch our own journal where we could, submit our work within India, within IIM, and from there we could start something.
So that's a question for the group, not for me. Jitu, hi.
I mean, there's incredible data that's been collected and gathered, and this amazing, biorepository that you're creating. How is it that you're going to get the cell, the molecular biologists, and the developmental biologists interested in what you have? It's been created with such care and such extreme effort. I think the most important thing for the research community in the country would be to have to be able to ask questions that emanate from this from the repository. I mean, do you have any strategies for that? Do you have any mechanisms?
Maybe Satyajit and Dinkar can add, but at the moment, as I said, we're not looking at it as a biorepository, we're looking at it as a program. And that's exactly, so it's not just about the samples, it's about the women and the pregnancy and the questions that are being asked. So we do have that governance pattern of going through a review process. We've encouraged our young investigators. The second last slide I showed was the sub-studies which have come up. The whole placenta program that's come up from this, which has a biologist working on it. We have a couple of physician scientists who've taken up the learning and imaging of the placenta. So it's a small beginning because we kind of, it took us 2 years to set up the cohort and then reach here. But this is a platform, and that therefore it is.
But to paraphrase that, unless we credibility in the reliability of the collection, going out into the community and inviting people would be a disservice. So really, I am inclined to argue that for the first 3 years or so, and I've been arguing this, we need to establish what I'm calling the reliability and credibility of the cohort and of the biorepository, of the material, of this, that, and the other. And really at this point, the banking is that at that earlier stage. But equally, the structures and systems for beginning to invite access, not just to give access, but to actively invite access, have been put in place. And so when CRED is established, that transition will be made.
So we have put the processes for what Satyajit is saying. We are having an internal monitoring and an external auditing of the biorepository, which we have now put in place. So, we will have answers to how the samples are.
Can I intervene?
Yes.
I haven't been a community in this country who will be able to address even a small fraction of what this entire program of yours.
Oh, we agree. Which is why some of these collaborations go outside the country.
Right.
Even now.
So there again, I think like for many of the other programs that are being put into place on this scale with the Indian population in mind. One needs to have mechanisms by which we can open these up for international collaboration.
Absolutely.
International, people who know and understand some of the science involved.
So we are in, with the Gates Foundation and the large group of Maternal Child Health Alliance sponsored by WHO and Gates Foundation. So we are already working with them. And I said about the omics.
That's easy. I mean, you can give access to people.
We're going to work on a mechanism.
What I wanted to stop making biorepository in mind. In fact, when we spent 2 years, I think, in trying to actually define the question that we're going to ask before the cohort was started developing, which is linked with proteomics and genomics of preterm birth. And we always had Satyajit with us as the devil's advocate. It was true that it actually took much longer to develop the cohort, and during the process, the idea of making sure that it is so difficult to develop the cohort, so might as well deposit the samples for many other questions that will come. It actually came, and it's very interesting. It is very interesting that the biorepository actually became a very important part of the study.
Sessions about, right? It's about evidence-based policy. I think a lot of, I'm not speaking for myself right now because I work on science that is extremely useless when it comes to humans. It's one of those extremely long shot type things. But I think a lot of people who go into biology hoping that their work will be useful for human beings, right? And I think all of us, to different extents, deal with the limitations of our research when it comes to actually being that, right, on the ground. And I think, even for people who do translational research, the question of how much what we already know and have known for sometimes 100 years, if not more, about biology, about basic things, much of that doesn't get translated into what actually shapes human lives on the ground. So, 2 suggestions. One is perhaps we're being limited even in constraining this conversation within biology, and it's in that context that you have somebody working on basic science of the kind that's not easily translated to somebody who works on epidemiology, and those are then the boundaries, and then those are the places where people feel boundaries exist. Perhaps if we are also exploring the questions of how it is and why it is that solutions that we already know of do and don't get implemented, some of that would broaden this conversation. The second suggestion is, I've been hearing since yesterday this question of don't worry about credibility, start something, and so on and so forth, right? This is something that all of us should do. So, on the one hand, I think it's great that the notion that white papers and so on will come out of this conference is great, but I think it would be nice if one could have, if we could say, we decide, maybe today, that many people here would be interested in the question of evidence-based policy, right? Broadly defined. I think there's a lot that's lacking in terms of evidence-based policy. And so this is one example, right, that you provided today in the talk of ways in which policy can be formulated in an evidence-based way. But then there are hundreds of other ways in which policy is being formulated in a non-evidence-based way. So can we think of a way that we could brainstorm generating collective input on some of these things? It's the same thing that I was essentially asking yesterday, which is can we start some kind of forum on which these things are discussed in a substantive way? How it is that we provide input to science policy, but also policy beyond science policy perhaps, that requires an understanding of scientific or biological evidence.
So, mostly a question for the group, caveats about the assumptions that you make. Firstly, I think all research is translational, because I think that science is fundamentally empowering for societies. And for us to forget that is to do ourselves and our societies the deepest possible disservice we can do. It's why it worries me when we talk about science outreach in terms of telling our societies about the certainties of science. What we really need to be telling our societies is about the glorious, progressive uncertainties of science. Because if that's not empowering, nothing is. Secondly, the question of how what we do impinges on policy acquires particular urgency in poor economies. Because every time you make innovations, and this I hope was apparent in the examples that Shinjini showed, every time you make technological innovations, they are usually characterized by two properties. One, they're relatively low-hanging fruits. And two, in order to reach the marketplace, they depend on the private sector, on the profit-making economy, and therefore on a whole range of compromises in the practical spheres of how this is done, to the point that the solution that, the so-called solution that you've designed becomes a relatively small component of what's going out and being talked about. Policy change, on the other hand, is, as again Shinjini showed examples of from the work of Dr. Ban and her and their colleagues, affects the poor far more directly, far more radically, and without the unhappy interventions of the market economy. So you might want to keep that in mind. Ron.
Well, I just wanted to which was very much my message to the group as well. So I just wanted this potentially to really sink in. And that is the notion that groups of scientists in India can self-organize around research problems to share and create something much bigger than you can create on your own. To take on ambitious problems, as you said, share reagents, share data. Again, organizing across institutes in India. And this is something that you don't have to wait for a government agency to give you approval to do. Because the change that needs to happen here would be too slow if you have to wait for that. And honestly, I think it is the obvious solution for India, which all of you know, critical mass issue. There are lots of complaints about this. So you can do something about this. And I think the way to think about this is bigger than your own lab, bigger than your department, bigger than your institute. And in this modern time where, you know, reagents can be shipped, Skype conversations can be held, there's no reason why people could not self-organize to create something bigger. And this was very much like the idea of a collaborative network that I was proposing, identical to the message that you gave. But I just wanted to have that really sink in right now, early in this meeting, because it would be very interesting if this is really in your head of thinking of groups of people that, you know, you may want to organize around. You know, centered on something a little bit bigger than the research question in your lab, really that kind of formulates a vision, if you like. You know, really to create a research vision that would unite a bunch of scientists within India. Needless to say, that could extend to people outside of India as well. There's no reason why that couldn't happen. But think about India first and foremost and your colleagues. And this is the right generation of people to do this. And I think right now, unfortunately, there's a counter message that often comes around from promotion committees that, you know, you have to do all this work yourself and so forth. Those are antique thoughts that do not pertain to modern times of science. So I think what you have to do is really take the leadership a little bit and even change, show people that the reward system and the way we do science should change. But there's nothing stopping anyone from doing that. And much of the initial work can be done with 0 rupees. I mean, if you're very successful, rupees may follow later. But, you know, I think the reward is actually just doing much better, exciting research with more colleagues and more ways, you know, to get the job done. And also having a lot more fun doing your science. But I'm planning this because if people have ideas for this about how you would like to self-organize, I'd love to hear it. And maybe also this meeting could be a seed for these kinds of collaborative networks, and maybe we can point to the 10 p.m. as, wow, that actually happened here.
So,
yes.
I think that's
there ain't that many of them.
Yeah.
There's even fewer than us, or you, or whatever.
Wait.
This question here?
Yeah, in the interest of time, I will come back to you.
No, but something out here. Coming back to the engagement with the policymakers, my question is, had you not been in a city like Delhi or in a place like AIIMS or THSTI, let's say you come from a very remotely located location in India with a much unknown university setup and with the similar kind of data, how easy it would have been for you to engage with the policymakers and how?
Issue because we were, as I said, we were fortunate to be in an environment which helped us to facilitate this. So we had an advantage. And but what I was trying to say is that engaging with the society and the policymakers, you know, you need to, if you have evidence, then it kind of helps you to push a point because they understand evidence. It's not as if they don't. And the second thing is that the importance of the question, like to go to Gurgaon Hospital and to be able to set up a research environment there was not easy. I mean, they don't have doctors after 2 o'clock, but to be able to get a clinical research unit going there is because we engaged with the government, we engaged with the doctors because they understood the importance of our research question. So I think it's just about giving the right messages. It's difficult, but...
So I'm going to disagree with Shinjini. I don't think Delhi matters. I don't think government institutions matter. And we have a striking example in the country, Christian Medical College in Belgium. It's not a government institution. It's well funded by government for research, of course, but it's not a government institution. It's in a remote part of the country, and yet amongst the small handful of clinical academics, nowhere are there large numbers of clinical academics. Not at the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, not at the Christian Medical College. There are outstanding practicing clinicians. But clinical academics is a whole different matter. And yet those small numbers in CMC over the decades have had exactly these kinds and categories of effects. So it's the quality of the work that eventually counts.